All right, so just quickly about the Accelerating Climate Resilience speaker series. This has been going on for a couple years now. We try to invite our speakers from all over the countries. There was one from Australia too, so I guess we're global. And so we're hoping from this series to have conversation about anything innovative, anything to help us be inspired and think about ways to advance climate resilience in our region. And so in the past, we've talked to some youth groups too. We talk about financial impact of sea level rise. We have talked about heat in the past and its implication housing. So this will be a nice continuation to talk about heat mitigation strategies here. So today, first I will introduce Claudia, and then she will take over and facilitate today's webinar. Claudia Zarazua is the City of Cambridge inaugural Arts and Cultural Planning Director. She has spent the past 15 years working at the intersection of urban design, arts and culture, and community development. Most recently, Claudia is working on expanding the role of artists and creatives in climate adaptation and social resilience work. I'm really lucky to get to call Claudia a friend and a colleague, and I'm super excited to see all the work that she has been doing and looking forward to seeing more great work, creative work that we can all learn from. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Claudia.
Thanks, Van, and welcome everyone. Like Van said, I'm Claudia Zarazua. I work for the City of Cambridge. I work at the intersection of arts and planning, so hard to define, but really something that gives me more freedom to do work like this. Today, we're joined by a great team of designers, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the genesis of our project and how I got to work with them. And then they're going to tell you a little bit about their work and the work that they did for the City of Cambridge. So just here we have Alejandro, Matt, Gabe, and Jeff. And Jeff brought two of his teammates, Jonathan and Sarah. And they'll tell you a little bit more about their work later on. Can you go to the next slide? So I'm going to start with a project I worked on when I was working at MAPC. Prior to coming to the City of Cambridge, I worked at the Arts and Culture Department at MAPC, and we developed a guide called Cool It With Art on how for municipalities to use and to integrate arts into their heat mitigation strategies. Can you go to the next slide, please? And in the guide, we looked in research across the country how other municipalities were dealing with heat mitigation and how arts organizations, and creatives could contribute to that type of work. We understood the work in three categories: creative engagement, creative cooling infrastructure, creative communications. And this project in particular is going to tell you a little bit more about what creative cooling infrastructure looks like. Next slide, please. The guide has examples of previous works across the country. This project I love and has received a lot of accolades. My Park, My Pool, My City. It's a theater company that work with the city of Austin, the recreation department, to activate swimming pools to make them more welcoming, get folks to actually cool down in the pool through arts and performance. You can find more information online about it. And then next slide. Another example out of New York. Next slide, please. And so it brings me to this. When I started to work in this area, this is one of the main communications we use to address heat and heat risk. And if we're here in the Northeast, we're not used to heat exposure as much as other areas in the country. But a lot of the things that we deal with under heat, like thirst, nausea, and all of that are maybe new to us. We don't know what we're experiencing. So it just made me realize that the way we communicate about heat is completely new to the region or to people living here. And maybe there's a better way to do that, a more culturally resonant way to do that, and a more creative way to do that. So if you go to the next one, please. When it comes to the way we deal with heat, I'll just talk about what I'm familiar with in the city of Cambridge. Up until 2022, we used to offer cooling shelters, which are just like that photo is an example of an article from the Globe. And most of municipalities do know what this is. It's just a room, chairs, tables, AC. So the last time we offered them in 2022, only 2 residents used them. And so it made us think, like, from a public health perspective, okay, so this is not working. We need to bring cooling where people are, like we need to bring it where they are. So my colleague in the public health department, Nancy, disaster preparedness director, she said, well, I'm just going to buy misting tents and place them all over the city and get folks to cool down across the city and just bring cooling where they are. And that at that time, I thought, well, maybe there is a more creative way to think about shade and cooling, where we could also bring that perspective from artists into the work. And next slide, please. And so it brought me to this project and looking at where the hotspots in the city are. If you look at this ambient air temperatures map and overlay it, if you go into the next slide, with a redlining map, no surprise, the correlation is there. The hot areas in the city are, were a part of discriminatory policies. Same thing with the urban canopy. The urban canopy in that area is below average, where the blue, the more desirable areas in the redlining map, the tree canopy there, it's above average and thriving. So here comes our next slide, please. This project, Shade is Social Justice. How do we think about shade, access to shade, and in addressing that legacy of discriminatory policies? How do we bring design, art, to prompt imagination, community building, and action to communicate the need for shade, but also to inspire folks to do more of this type of work? I'm gonna just give you a quick overview of the 3 projects that we were able to achieve this summer. This is a project led by Jeff Goldenson. He worked with a local group of teens, a youth advisory group, to design a place for teens built by teens. And he'll tell you more about it. This is really exciting. Next slide, please. This is a project called Growing Shade by designer Alejandro Saldarriaga, who will tell you a little bit more about the project. This is really working with trees and providing a shade while these trees grow, and worked in partnership with our Bangladeshi community. And he'll tell you a lot more about that project in a little bit. And then the next one, please. And then this is sunblock, literally and figuratively. This is an installation in our cultural district, in our main square in Central Square. And it looks to provide the much needed shade that the square needs, but also provide a space for programming, which is, the square is a very active location. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the process. We received a grant from MAPC through their Accelerating Climate Resilience grant program at the beginning of 2023. And then we started the process of selecting the teams as a public art procurement process. This is in partnership with the Arts Council, our Arts Council, Lillian Sue, the Director of Public Art. We followed a purely public art procurement process, which is traditionally a call for artists. We were not asking for proposals at the time. We were asking for qualifications. We convened a selection committee with some staff representation and community representation. We convened a technical advisory committee from city staff to help us make the selection of the locations and the design teams. And then once we had a selection of the teams, the finalists, we went through interviews and then started the process maybe late in the summer when they were all under contract. I will say that for those folks interested in doing this type of work in their municipality, there's plenty of talent in the region. It was really hard for us to get to the final original three, that we ended up finding additional funding to hire an additional three. So in total, we had 6 teams selected to develop 6 installations. So again, if you're folks interested in doing something like this, there's great talent in the region. Each team received a total of $27,000 to design and fabricate install for installation their project. The city supported them with community engagement and ongoing programming. Community engagement for each project looked very different. Here's just some images. We did the traditional tabling approach, sharing more about the project, about the concepts. We visited some classrooms, some community partners. We share the project with our community outreach team in the city. And then, something perhaps not as conventional from the municipal approach, but Alejandro joined the New England Bangladeshi American Foundation's New Year celebration as a special guest to share more about his project, his work, and get feedback from the community. And then obviously Jeff worked really closely with teens. They had a recurrent design sessions every Tuesday and Thursday, I think. So community engagement really looked very different depending on what project, the context, and the season in the year. One thing we found was that it was really difficult to talk about heat in the winter. Folks, want to be in the sun in the winter. And so when we wanted to talk about shade and bringing, a canopy or anything like that, it was not, folks were not responding to that. It was, so we have a very short, limited a window to talk about heat, and it's really like right before it gets really bad, like in that April, May time. That's when we were able to talk more about heat. I think this is my last slide before I pass it over to Jeff to tell you a little bit more about their work.
Jeff, are you ready? Do you want to just show the video, Jeff, or do you want to have some introduction?
Yes, please. Hi, I'm Jeff, everybody. Nice to meet y'all. I figured we'd start with a video, just to sort of, this was in the process.
Okay, give me 1 second. Making sure. Okay, great.
I have an uncle who owns a corner store, right? He's had this corner store for years.
4.5 decades.
All the way back. And it used to be everybody would come to the corner store, and it's right next to a park. It's called Sashionis, if you want to go. Everybody used to come, but nowadays nobody comes. There used to be people playing all these games and having fun at the park, and after they come by for some ice cream.
slush lines coming out to here.
But now there's nobody at the parks and nobody's around anymore. Let's bring Cambridge back to its glory days, okay? And let's get the community built up to where it needs to be, to where we can have fun summers for teenagers and overall make everybody's life better.
Come over and start up a conversation, face me and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now it's
Manuel Fernandez, Chief Equity Officer, and I'm going to go off script for a minute and say how proud I am that 3 of my former students from CSUS now as principal are leading the show here. What impresses me more than the idea of shade as a physical entity, what impresses me more is in this city with all its resources, that a group of teenagers have lifted up the fact that the pandemic did damage to the mental health of our young people, where they are informing us that we must do better. So I can assure you that you've got a lot of folks here representing a lot of organizations, and I will be hopefully collaborating with them to see how we can lift up your idea and make it a reality.
Thanks, everybody. We're gonna just go fly through these slides. So I'm Jeff. I run Buildingways, a someday soon to be nonprofit. Next slide. Shade is a teen-led place to chill. We put this sign up because now we're operating during the school year, and it's only available to upper school students. Next slide. That's Shade. Next slide. So I think I want to, I guess, highlight the fact that we kind of took on 2 challenges simultaneously. I think we're all here because we recognize urban temperatures are rising. I think concurrently, teen mental health is falling, and that's also a sort of pants on fire problem. So we decided to take the opportunity of this project to sort of work at the intersection of these 2 issues. Next. Slide, please. So I'm not sure if these are strategies or what, but we're going to go through Shade. The teens called it Shade, just for clarity there. Recognizing that it's a co-created, programmed amplifier of teen health. So next slide, please. Co-created, I think next slide. We did this with teens. And this was a space created by teens, for teens. I think in reality, it's, teens were the thin edge of the wedge. It's for everybody, but by starting with teens, that was particularly powerful. Next slide. It also took a larger team of community leaders and programming providers to partner with at the outset to be selected as a team member. Next slide. So programmed, I think what we found is it was really valuable, next slide, to have the space activated. So we had a teen team and got the school department to fund them to do events over the summer. Yeah, it could bring a little life to it. Next slide, please. Amplifier, I think this quality I wanted to sort of, highlight. I think next slide. So our site was, intentionally selected. I think we're within a constellation of existing civic assets, right? So like a pool where you can swim, basketball courts where kids hoop, like you can run in the field. There's a youth center, you can climb. There's a middle school. I think what we were, sort of over time it revealed, and I think Jonathan could speak to this, is kids are also really welcome to space just to chill. And that actually isn't in the landscape provided for them, but it allows them to just stay longer. Next slide. So, oh, there's a video. So this is from yesterday. If you're all able to play the other video real fast. So this was yesterday at the site. Maybe we won't be able to do it. Oh, okay, here it is. All right, hold on. It's a good idea. The last slide is teen health. Sarah Lincoln can speak to this greater, but I think we found meaning and perhaps a problem that the community felt like they can more readily tackle. Climate change is such a global problem. I think it can be daunting, but teen health is a really current kind of pants on fire problem that we I felt, got a lot of traction with. So I think the next slide. Sarah can speak to this, but we got supplemental funding from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration grant. And I want to highlight how transformative that was. And Sarah was behind that. But I think, all of our efforts are not to increase property values or gentrification to make health change. And I think trying to harness public health is powerful. Next slide. And should be done. Oh, what's next? Next slide is basically we're trying to design. What are we trying to do? We're trying to design against, if you could go advance the slide. We have to design against the sun and the cell phone. And get kids off phones and engaging each other and having sort of embodied, tangible experiences in the shade. Thanks. And we're available for business.
Okay, should I start? Small intro.
Yes, please. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, Alejandro Saldarriaga. I'm Colombian architect and designer. I was born and raised in Bogota. I arrived to Boston to do my master's degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Currently, right now, I'm a full-time faculty at Northeastern University. And I run a small research practice that I correlate with my courses here and my job in academia. I put up a couple of images just to show the previous work that I've been able to do in Bogota. I started practicing the framework of the pandemic, creating these temporary infrastructures that are very low cost and low tech in the public realm of Bogota. This was a chapel during the Holy Week dates of the pandemic in Bogota. Next slide, please. Which led me later to work with underprivileged communities, specifically in informal neighborhoods in Bogota. This is an example of a fog catcher that we built with a community in the outskirts of the city. Next slide, please. So yeah, I was mostly practicing in Bogota, but then slowly I wanted to get more opportunities within the city of Cambridge. And then I arrived to Shadis Social Justice. That's also is part, I'm one of the beneficiaries of this program as well, because this was my first project here in the US, which I'm very happy about. Next slide. To explain a bit where I was located, this is, I was assigned to the Russell Fields Park, which is next to the Alewife Station, and most importantly, it's very close to the Range Towers. Next slide. Claudia talked about briefly that I was collaborating with a Bangladeshi community that a lot of their community members reside in these towers, which are very high density towers. Many of them do not have access to air conditioning, and therefore they look for outdoor spaces to cool down during the summer months. Next slide. The main problematic lies behind that. Russell Fields is a space that traditionally has been dedicated to sports infrastructure for the local high schools, which is great, definitely. But at the same time, as you can see in these images, it's rare to find shaded spaces where this community can hang out. Next slide, please. So this was a project that we worked directly with the Cambridge Department of Public Works. And in my previous experiences with other projects, it's always good to work with, or at least consider the people who are going to give you the permit, work with them directly. And the design was fitting into an ongoing initiative. Next slide, please. Which was the Healthy Forest, Healthy City initiative. And most importantly, next slide, their mission to plant 1,000 street trees each year. So this was the beginning of the project as well. I'm always drawn to existing infrastructure. Funnily enough, I was very drawn to these little sticks that hold saplings in their growth. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Thinking about how we can turn this into architecture, essentially. Because it's a transient infrastructure for allow trees to grow in and then serve as a permanent shading device. So next slide. I have a very annoying presentation methodology that it's clicking through a lot of slides. So please click through the next 2 slides. So yeah, essentially it was transforming these tree stakes into an architectural element, which is a column. Next slide. And then understanding that we are in the Northern Hemisphere, that the sun travels in a sun path only in the south part. And also this is what we call the sun path. We use this as an analytical tool in architectural design to know how the sun is moving around the building. It is circular because it is a reflection on the global or spheric shape of the Earth. Next slide. And as such, this enclosure itself also follows a circular pattern. Of course, placing trees in a higher density in the southern part of the circle and a lesser density in the northern part of the circle, just to provide the shade where, or at least provide shade and trees where it needs to be. Next slide. So the project consists of placing 8 trees in a concentric manner. Next slide, please. And then letting the trees grow so it actually eventually will provide the permanent shaded infrastructure for the residents of the Ridge Towers. Next slide. Of course, each of these trees, I would have loved to gotten more deep into the landscape and the ecology out of these trees that we were placed. For now, it was just about scale, color, and I would say height. So in the northern part, we have the tallest trees that tend to be the thinnest proportion, and also the red maple, which indicate a color or a changing of time in autumn. Next slide, we have the eastern redbuds, which actually are in spring, that turn into a lilac color. So this intervention also wants to show the passing of time throughout the different flowering of the different trees. And then in the summer months, where the southern trees actually do the most work, which is a Japanese tree lilac that bloom in a white color at the beginning of the summer. Next slide. So while the trees grow, what's going to happen? Next slide. All of these, so this is what we call an unrolled elevation of the project as well. You can see all of the columns. The center is the north and the sides indicate the south. As you can see here, mostly a projection of the growth of the trees and how the columns are connected through these fabric. Next slide. And the project is designed, next slide, please, during the winter months, next slide, and the autumn months for the fabric to actually be removed and placed again during the summer months for the duration of around 2 years while the trees grow and provide shade for the actual space in the infrastructure. And you can like run through these. These are images, or actually stay in this one. Sorry, small thing, reflection. So this are the images of the project done in its current state. You can see here how the columns are working as the saplings grow. An interesting reflection that I think Claudia and I lived through when the project was installed was that the Bangladeshi community was very shy in approaching the space. They actually were asking permission if they could actually go inside the space, even though we had the community engagement event and the inaugural event. I'm happy to say that the community is very comfortable in approaching and appropriating the space as their own. Next slide. Yeah, and this is the day of activation. Next slide. And the table that it's been very popular. And yeah, this is my contact info for anybody who wants to keep in touch.
Thank you. I see a comment that they can't see the slides. Is that still the case?
No one can see my slide?
Yeah, you can. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Next is the team, Gabe and Matt. If you want to introduce yourself and then tell us about your work.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. My name's Matt Okazaki. My partner and collaborator on this project is Gabe Cira. Maybe wave your hand there. And our project is called Sunblock. I think that for us, there's a couple guiding questions or principles about this project. One is, how do you provide shade in an urban setting, right? Like, so there's a lot of places that already have shade, but in places that are the concrete jungle that have a lot of buildings around it, how do you provide shade? Umbrellas are a solution that usually last a month or two. Trees, as Claudia mentioned, can't always be planted. So what do you do in a place like the city to provide shade? The other question is, how do you make a cool space, I mean it in both senses of the word, cool space, flexible, accessible, and adaptable to as many needs and requests of the general public. And that was something that Gabe and I had to grapple with. And then also, how do you create a redeployable strategy or system that works in the city of Cambridge, but also in other cities as well? And Claudia said it's an infrastructural project, and I totally agree with that. How do we create public infrastructure of shade and climate resilience? So next slide. One of the things that we talked about was that buildings provide shade. So when you are in the city and you want to go into a shaded area, where do you go? You go to the side of the street that's in the shade. So Gabe and I were interested in making a building in some ways that provided shade. So this project serves both the interior space and the exterior space. So the interior provides cooling and shade, but as you notice in the top left slide, because of the solar patterns, during different times of the day, it provides shade as well. So we wanted to kind of create a public one-room building that provided shade both inside and outside. Next slide. Oh no, the spinning wheel of death. Well, I can keep talking. So the project is made of just a few parts. So a steel frame structure, agricultural mesh, and stoops. The stoops also add to the building element. All of these are cheap, ready, available, off-the-shelf materials that can be just purchased from any vendor or supplier, even Home Depot, and brought out to site. In order to keep it flexible, yeah, 73, perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. 73 is great. The shade is an agricultural mesh. It is used in farms and has a variety of densities. What Gabe and I really liked about this this fabric was that it, one, provided shade, and two, also allowed ventilation. The silver, the aluminette, provides reflectivity, so it's not just about shade, but it's about heat loss. And we found that even shade is not enough necessarily. It's a way we need to find ways to provide cooling. The mesh can be opened and closed to varying different programmatic needs. So we worked with various stakeholders in the city of Cambridge to kind of find out what they might want to use this for. And so during certain programs, the shade can be pulled up, and during other programs, it can be pulled down to like a classroom. The stoops were also all movable and reconfigurable. So one person with a jack and a dolly, which we provided to the business improvement district, could actually wheel these things around and make different organizations. So right now we have it in a kind of a casual, informal setting, but it could also be aligned together to create like a stage setting. And the next slide. I think one of the most practical or pragmatic discoveries out of this, and one of the challenges which you all face in urban settings, is how do you create footings or create stability in a place where you can't necessarily drill or dig down deep. And so we used, could you go to the next slide? We designed a system that used these concrete stoops as actual footings for the frame. And you'll notice here we drilled into the concrete stoops. That provided enough support for things like wind load, And one thing that I also want to mention is that the frame is a completely disassemblable. So as we think about how things get relocated or expanded upon to different parts of the city, we also wanted to think about how it was modular and movable. So all of this can be done with a couple people on a ladder. And Gabe, maybe you can take over as we flip through the rest of the slides.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I'm glad to say a few more words about this particular detail here because before we move on, because the challenge was it would have been really expensive to make footings, but also the city of Cambridge was like, well, for this, it's technically temporary, so we don't want you to do footings at all because that kind of triggers procurement requirements that would have kind of spun this to a different department or something like that. So it's like obviously footings uncover all these difficulties. So I really consider this to be the major innovation of our project, which is how to make a really heavy counterweight that provides structural stability for a large structure while also providing kind of value above ground and also thermal mass for seating and for cooling. One of my favorite, I didn't take photos, but one of my favorite moments with this structure was the first part of the heat wave where it was kind of very overcast in the evening, but really hot. And people were kind of sprawled out all over the stoops because they were nice and cool. So that the cooling also comes from the thermal mass of the concrete. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, just photo of us hanging out in the space. I think we just have a series of photos of folks using it in slightly different ways. So next slide. Also, it's really nice. Central Square is a very active place for nightlife. So people are using it all throughout the day. That's one important part of the cube design is it's sort of like transparent at certain moments during the night. So it's a really fun place. Although it's opaque to sunlight, or I think 80% opaque to sunlight, you can see right through it during certain parts of the day. So, especially at night. Also, people eat and drink and hang out there a lot. I've observed over the last few months the accumulation of ice cream dribbles and coffee spills is a kind of indicator of the areas that get the most use during certain times of day. So like, everything in public space, it's getting constantly used for different ways. And I've really enjoyed being basically kind of schooled by the way that people take over this space for themselves at various situations, social and otherwise, throughout the whole day. Next slide. So yeah, temporary events. There's a lot of programming around it done by a group that Matt mentioned, the Central Square BID, or Business Improvement District. So you can see that, yeah, they've been programming. Next slide. And one more, actually, please. Let's see. Yeah, so you can see on the left side of the screen, one stoop supported on dollies. So these are automotive dollies that each have 4 casters, and they're just a steel dolly meant to go under a car wheel in like a garage to move the car around if it's not able to be rolled. And you can also see on the bike trailer in the center photo. So that's Aiden that worked with us on this project. One of my students from MassArt that was kind of doing summer work with us. Aiden has the 4 dollies attached to the bike trailer as well as an automotive jack. So one of these things that you can just pump up and down. So we also designed this like really simple method that does not use any machine with a motor or like a diesel engine to move these things around, even though they're like 1,000 or 1,800 pounds. The small ones are like 1,000, the bigger ones are bigger or heavier. So all of what you see on the bike trailer can move a 2,000 pound piece of furniture around the urban landscape. So I thought that was a really great solution as well to the idea of making something heavy and permanent and something that's not movable by your average person, but that with a very small amount of equipment can be easily reconfigured to accommodate like a temporary event or a performance or a lecture or any kind of thing that happens in this like very, very heavily used public plaza. Next slide. Next slide. Matt, do you have anything else to add? Because I mean, I think we're just kind of showing all the ways that people use it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys. As you can see, you know, with when we set out the call for artists, we were looking for temporary shade structures, really temporary public art installations, and for different locations in the city. And we got a breadth of experiences, really, from the teen lab effort to the sunblock cube in Central Square. And now we're in the process of looking at what's next. They are meant to be temporary, so we're thinking about what happens in the winter. Do they come back next summer? We have 2 additional installations coming up next summer. I think Carolina Aragon was in the room. She's one of the artists to develop another shade structure next summer. So this is, you know, just to show you a little bit of what we've been doing to provide additional shade in Cambridge. One of the genesis of the project was also to create awareness for the need for shade, and I think at that we can claim success because the community advocated for funding through our participatory budget for permanent shade structures, referencing this project as an inspiration. So now the city is allocating funding for a capital project to create additional shade around the city. That project is just starting. We're starting with a community engagement process, asking people where shade is needed. One thing we need to work on, however, is on communicating why not trees. That's the first comment we get from folks is, how about trees? Have you thought about trees? And we need to, while we have a great forestry team and we have the forestry plan, we've run into the issue of explaining with the growth cycle of a tree and the needs of for a healthy root in terms of underground utilities, sidewalk. So trying to explain that trees are not the only solution. And it's, you know, that's something that we still need to work on. I'm gonna now open it up for Q&A. So gonna look at the chat, see if there are any questions. Okay, so
Claudia, this one earlier on about whether the projects cover O&M as well.
I imagine O&M is operations and maintenance.
Yes.
Is that
yes,
correct?
Sorry, that is.
Yes. So as because this was a public art project, part of our public art procedure is to request a maintenance plan for each installation. Since these were temporary, the maintenance plan looks a little bit different, but we have a maintenance plan for each one of them. One of them, the shade team is a temporary installation. It's scaffolding, so it'll come down next month, and that goes back to the scaffolding company. So that plan looks very different, but the other 2 installations do have a maintenance plan that, you know, we've had to use at least once for one of them. knowing that we have a lot of practitioners in the room, I wonder if you designers could share like one lesson from your perspective as a vendor consultant working with a municipality, how municipalities could procure this type of work.
Could you be more specific on like?
Yeah, like what, if let's say, I know Gabe and Matt, you've done work with the city of Boston, but if another city was interested in doing a similar project, what would you look for, or what is your advice based on this experience? I know Gabe and Matt have thoughts about water, integrating misting features in installations like this.
I'll jump in and just say, don't break ground. I think something fundamentally different happens when in Massachusetts, because construction is defined, I think, as when you break ground. So if you don't, and you use ballast and weight and all that stuff, then you're in a whole different ballgame of possibility. And as long as you account for wind, yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, that was like the golden road to spatial justice. Kind of.
I would say maybe have them more organized. Like if the process requires to have community engagement, like personally, I think the process that I was involved in would have benefited a lot more from more direct feedback from the community, but it was very hard to organize having a collective space where I could present. And what ended up happening is that we needed to move forward with the design just because of timeframes. So we didn't get feedback until the design was already done. Thankfully, the people liked it. There was not necessarily a negative reaction, but maybe if some of you are planning to engage with similar processes, definitely like pre-preparing, I would say, community engagement meetings would be very useful for the designers who are in the process.
Yeah, and this is where I will also share that the timing is key. It was really hard to talk to folks in the winter about the summer. So, luckily our procurement worked where the designers were under contract in the summer, and then they had to install it the following summer. So they had time to do some engagement. But I will say that, from November to maybe March, the topic of heat, summer, and shade, it was just not interesting. At least in this climate. I don't know where the rest of the country.
One thing I'll mention is that well, a couple things. Open space and shade is a theme for, I think, all of us. Trees add shade, but also limit what else can happen on, say, a public plaza or in a park. Looking at urban form was really important for us to see, like, the fact that there's Mass Ave right next to our site defines the patterns of behavior for the people in the space, as well as the kind of predominant times of day and the associated kind of sun angles that are most important to take into account. But then also people like big open spaces. So there's a lot of sort of conflicting factors that have to be somehow gracefully resolved. I thought that was a important lesson to take into account. And then also one thing that, Alejandro, that you mentioned during your presentation was that people at first wanted to ask permission to kind of enter and take over the space, which I've also found, like, at first when we erected our shade cube, I saw people like kind of come up to it, look at it, read the sign, and then like kind of walk away, and it was just breaking my heart. Now that it's been up for a while, you see it used so regularly, and people are getting used to it, which is a big part of that in public space, is that it takes time for people to learn that they themselves can occupy and kind of feel ownership over things like this in public space, once there's elements of seating or enclosure that are a little bit different from like your more recognizable public bench. So that kind of learning curve is really important to take into account as well.
I'm going to address a comment here. Did you get any verbal or written feedback from users? Yes, we received feedback from users both in person and written feedback. And you know, there were some great comments about the project and excited that you know we were thinking about shade in this way. To some others that you know wanted just to sit on the grass. They didn't want a bench or a table or a canopy. They just want to sit down on the grass. And others that had thoughts about the material that was used. But yeah, we are able to capture the feedback.
I'll say this though, for the Bangladeshi community, definitely they don't, or at least from what I realize is that they're not necessarily aware of the resources for them to give written feedback, or they're just like not interested. So mostly the feedback that I got from the Bangladeshi community need to be in by word of mouth and talk to it presently.
Did you include any signage about heat importance? We didn't. We didn't have anything highlighting the need for shade and the impact to your health due to extreme heat. It is something that we're thinking about. We had signage in some locations about what the project was and the background of the project, but it is something that we are thinking for a citywide strategy, like how do we address shade, the need for shade, how do we communicate it? I think we learned from our public health team this summer that the early heat waves that we had in the summer were really bad to our in-house community. So we need to work on a communication strategy, especially about drinking water and staying hydrated. So I just want to give a chance to Sarah and Jonathan and see if they want to share a little bit about their experience working on it. I know, Sarah, you've been doing this work on teen mental health for a while. Just talking, if you want to share a little bit about your experience getting to build something with them and what you observed.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Claudia. Yeah, as Claudia mentioned, I am from the public health department in the city, and my work actually centers a lot more on youth and their well-being. And so it's interesting that I find myself here, and it really came from this, honestly, like a random meeting that I had with Jeff at this network event for people who are working with young people in the city. And he was talking about the beginnings of this particular project, and it was almost exactly the same conversation that I've been having with a lot of my community partners and the youth in our city around how you know, if young people are experiencing greater mental health challenges, especially as a result of the pandemic, what can we do about that? And one of the big, like, honestly, protective factors that came out from a lot of these community conversations that we had was that, like, relationships, social support is such a huge thing. And so how are we fostering relationships between young people themselves? And something interesting that came up in all these conversations was like, where are the physical spaces to do that, though? There aren't actually many of those for teens themselves in the city. And we really love that idea, but I don't know, I didn't even know how to even get that started. So it was, I don't know, pure luck that I ran into Jeff and he explained that exactly. So it was really cool to just really partner on that as quickly as we did. And like Jeff had mentioned a little bit in the presentation, I have funding specifically through like a substance use prevention grants. But for me, I feel like we were really easily able to make the case really based on all this community conversations we had been having about, you know, what can we do as it relates to mental health for the young people in our city. I know we're almost at time, so I want to give
Yeah.
Jonathan maybe a chance to
Yes, yeah, Jonathan, if you could share a little bit more about your experience, your takeaway.
Yeah, so initially I was just contributing like design, like artistic design to the structure. And we worked on this like mannequin sort of dummy to put in the swings. And when I brought it, the kids were just like immediately engaged with it. Like, and back to like the community element, like when you have this space that literally connects everyone together, it turns like individual social circles into like one big social circle. And like it removes sort of like the clickiness a little bit. It removes sort of like the feeling of isolation that some kids have. It's like they get to feel like they're alone on their little beanbag, but other people are also there. So I noticed like, and just being a Cambridge resident, like the community element is really increasing because of this structure for sure.
Thanks. I will note that I think it's time. I don't know if there are any other last minute questions, Van.
No, thank you. Sorry again for the technical issues. We will make a copy of the presentation and include it with the recording as well. Thank you all for joining today. Sarah and Jonathan too, last minute. Thank you for making the time to join us. I hope you all learned something interesting today, and please follow up if you have any questions. And yeah, looking forward to the next one. Really appreciate your time today. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
Thanks. Take care all.